Good day, everybody, and welcome to the webinar on First Principles Estimating. My name is Evilio de Abreu. I'm the Regional Executive here at CCS office in Centurion, a city in the Gauteng province of South Africa. It is my pleasure to present this webinar to you. Today I'll be presenting First Principles Estimating and the benefits of using it in Candy. Due to the large number of people logged in, we will not be able to answer any questions during the webinar. However, please submit your questions during the session with the provided function on screen. At the end of the session, we will reply to your questions via email. Please note that the webinar will also be recorded, and you will receive the link to download it after this live webinar. There is a webinar once a month on various Candy topics. Should you not be able to attend the webinar at any given time frame, please still register for them, and you'll be entitled to receive a recorded copy. Let's get started. Okay, let's have a look at the agenda that we're going to be covering for this webinar. First thing is we're going to find out what is First Principles Estimating. Then we'll look at how to price from First Principles in Candy. Then we'll cover towards the end of the session, we'll cover the benefits of First Principles Estimating. Let's have a look at the introduction. So the construction industry is a very competitive environment and is an industry which generally operates with low margins. So this creates a requirement to have a clear understanding of your direct and indirect costs on the project. But to achieve this, a detailed estimate down to simple resource level is required, and every bill item on a bill of quantity should be worked out to an exact amount of materials, waste, plant, labor, and supervision required. So this is called First Principles Estimating. The First Principles Estimating is a method of pricing bill items. The bill items are priced using resources and construction methods, productions, wastes are applied to calculate the net rate for every bill item. So let's take, for example, the build-up rate per square meter to construct a brick wall. So the following needs to be considered. What resources will be required? So these are material resources, things like your bricks, your mortar, and your brick force. What construction methods are you going to be using? So are going to be self-performing, subcontracting. So that also affects what labor force you're going to be utilizing. Is it site mix or ready mix? That will also affect how you build up your rates. Look at how much waste you want to allow. You think about your productions, how many bricks per shift you can lay. You look at the equipment required. Are you going to move material via crane, lift, or are you going to use scaffolding? And you also look at the small tools required. Trowels, spirit level, wheelbarrows, and jointers, etc. Okay, so now that we know what is First Principles Estimating, we're going to look at how to price from First Principles in Candy. So the system itself basically complements First Principles pricing. It's basically its foundation of the system. And that's where you're going to utilize the tool to its full potential. So I'm going to demonstrate live in the software how to price using First Principles Estimating. So in Candy, it's through what we call worksheets and resources. So to build up a worksheet or to build up a rate, you require resources. They can be in the form of simple and complex resources. So let's show you how that's done within Candy. Here you'll see a typical bill of quantities. And I'm just going to show you an example that's already been priced, and I'm going to look at the example I used with regards to the brick wall. And you'll see here's an item in my bill, one brick wall in foundations. And you'll notice the attributes is on the attributes column, which is a column I displayed in my bill. It displays a W. So W means it's worksheet. So it's got a worksheet behind it. That means the rate build up behind it is available. You'll also notice other pricing modes is unpriced, so an attribute will be U for unpriced. In some cases, if you want to get a quick thumbsuck price, you can also plug it in. And in some cases, you might want to split the rate, but that's not ideal because either plug rate or split rate's not going to basically be utilizing the tool to its full potential. So to utilize Candy to its full potential to get the right sort of control, we'll use what we call worksheet pricing. So let's have a look at this. So to build up that rate, behind it is a worksheet. So how do I display it? You can just simply double click on it and it displays what we call the worksheet. And you'll see it's basically 300 calculation lines available to calculate this rate. It consists of, in this example, my one brick wall. You'll see it's got a bricklaying team and I've got a rate per day. You've got your mortar, which is a rate per cube, and you apply that to convert it to a per square meter rate. And then you've also got your stock bricks and the rate per 1,000, and then I'll say divided by 1,000 times 104 to get a rate per square meter. You'll also notice when I'm on the stock bricks, it's like a light shading. So that to me is an indication that it's a simple resource. But if I go to the cement mortar, you'll see it's like a pinkish shading, and that's an indication that behind that there's another rate build-up. So simple resources is basically something you can buy or hire. Classic example is your bricks. So you can just buy it, it's a simple resource. When it comes to complex resources, it's a combination of simples and complexes. So if I look at that cement mortar, how did I get to that? If I build that up, if I double click on it, it takes us to what we call a complex worksheet. And there you can see it's built up using my cement and my building sand, and apply my mix design to get the 1 in 4 mix mortar. And that gives me a rate of 931 per square meter. So all of this combined gives me a total rate of 460.28 per square meter for that one brick wall. Great, so I'm going to demonstrate live how to get to these, or how to price in Candy using first principles pricing. And I'm going to use this section at the bottom. It's the addendum. Say addendum. And just to give you an example or an idea of how would we price something from scratch in Candy. So you'll see C30 concrete in foundations. I'm pricing 1,700 cubes, and this is the rate that I want to build up. So just to give you a quick idea, plug rate, simple thumb suck, you just type it in. Whenever I price something, I need to trade it. I select the trade. These trades are not typically sits in the masters, and they'll be unique to your company. And I'll select concrete. And you'll see the attribute now is a P, meaning that rate has been plugged. Not ideal. You're not going to be using the tool to its full potential. The best you get out of that is what we call the trade analysis. If I run the trade totals, you can see for concrete, 11 million, 1.7 million has been plugged. So we know how much money we require for concrete, but we don't know what material is required for it. And this is why plug rates is not ideal. A little bit better is split rate pricing. So you could specify in the split rate columns how much money you want to allocate, let's say to labor. Let's say 200 per square, and then or per cube, and then material 800 per cube. So at least I can get 1,000 per cube, but when I run a trade totals, I can see the value 11 million, and I can see that value split into the split rates. But it's still not ideal because we don't know what labor is it. Is it skilled, semi-skilled? And what material are we using? Are we using batch or are we using ready mix? And that's not ideal, and you're not going to get a resource usage or resource analysis out by doing split rate pricing. So let's get back to the worksheet. I'll show you how to display the worksheet. You could also right click and display worksheet, and that gives me those 300 lines available to calculate this rate. So to build up the rate, I'm going to use ready mix. Just say, for example, I want to use ready mix. So I need to go to the resource list. And you'll see the resource list already has existing resources. And I can roll it up. The resource list is ordered by the resource code. So what I mean by that is it's grouped in alphanumeric order based on the resource code. So in this example, this is how I'm structuring my resource list. If I've got a 5, it's for permanent materials. If it starts with the 2, it means it's a labor resource. And it makes it a lot easier then to find resources, and it also prevents duplicates. So for example, I want 30 MPa ready-mix concrete, so I'll go look for it in permanent materials. And it's got to do with concrete, so all my concrete starts with 5.1. And if it's ready-mix, it's 5.11. That's my coding structure, and then in there, I can see all my ready-mix resources. And you'll notice I don't have one for 30 MPa ready-mix concrete, so I'll need to create a new one. So you couple of ways to do it. You'll create a new line. You specify what type of resource is it. It's material. So these are the resource types, again, defined by you as a user. And the codes are obviously taking into account my coding structure. Remember 5.11 to identify that it's ready-mix. So I want it to be grouped in that category, so I'll specify 5.11, and the rest of the code is entirely up to you in terms, and it's got to be unique. So I'm going to make it 4.5. Notice I've kept some increments there. So if I need to add something in between, I've got some space. Then the description, I can type it in or can copy it from the item above and then edit it. So that's C30. The unit, I'm also going to just copy it per cube. Generally, a unit would be defined by how you're going to buy it. So ready-mix, you buy it in ready-mix, you buy your ready-mix in cubic meters, so you put it in cubic meters. If your sand, if you're buying it per cube or per load, it's entirely up to you. You've got to specify it in the unit to measure that you're going to buy it in. A classic example is lintels. So your precast concrete lintels are normally measured in meters based on the standard system, but you actually buy it in lengths. So in Candy, the resource list or the resource itself, those lintels, you'd have to specify it in lengths, and you'll convert it to per cubic meter rate in the worksheet. Okay, so I'll specify my rate per cube. Yeah, now I've got that ready mix, and I want to use that in my worksheet. So you can just drag and drop it into that worksheet. And then this is where you apply your IP. I mean, things like your production, your wastages. And in this case, I'm going to apply waste plus 10% waste. And you write it as if you're writing on a piece of paper. So that's what we refer to as format-free calculations. And basically, whoever reads this worksheet can understand how you calculated it. This percent waste is also hard-coded in the system. So it will find every resource with that syntax, percent waste. And then we'll apply a wastage report and to manage to be able to calculate a wastage analysis for us based on that. Okay, now I need to place my concrete. So I go look for labor. Now I've already got some labor resources, so maybe I'm lucky I can reuse some existing resources. I go to my labor gangs, and you'll notice I mentioned earlier simple and complexes, and there's that red shading again. So these are a combination of simples. So if I go to the placing gang, how did that rate per day come about? If I double click it, I can see that build up. It consists of the ganger and 6 laborers. So I can reuse these complexes, and actually it's a method of speeding up your pricing process. So next time I need to place concrete again, I don't have to recreate that labor gang. I just use that same complex on various concrete bill items. And that's a method of speeding up the pricing process. I can drag and drop that into my worksheet. And you'll notice again, rate per day, but I'm pricing a rate per cube. And again, you need your IP. This is where each company is unique. They've got the different productions. So I say I'm going to achieve, this is in foundations, so let's say 10 meter cube per day. And that then calculates my rate per cube. And you'll notice again, it's like I'm writing on a piece of paper, so it's format-free calculations. I could have just said divided by 10 cubes, the same rate, but whoever reads this now needs to guess what is 10. And this is why you put as much info as possible in. 10 meter cube per day, And the system still manages to calculate the answer for us based on our unique format-free calculation functionality. And you'll see the total rate there, 1694.40. When I'm happy, I store it. You'll notice I had it priced in split rate mode. Do you want to change it to worksheets? Yes, I want to change it. And that rate now appears on my bill of quantities. You'll notice the split appears on the split rate columns, and you'll notice the attribute is W4 worksheet pricing. You'll notice the next item is concreting walls, so it'll be a lot quicker to price this item because I can use my previous worksheet as the template. And if I go into that worksheet, I trade it, give it a trade concrete, and that is now available for me, and I can just pull in that price code from my previous item. So I can insert a worksheet. I can scroll for my previously priced item. It was concrete in foundations. And then I can edit to suit this worksheet. And you'll notice because it's in walls, waste will be a lot less. So 5% waste. And because the production is also going to be less, instead of 10 cubes a day, I can achieve, let's say, 5 cubes a day. When I store it, you'll see that rate is updated to 1893. So that's worksheet pricing in a nutshell. We'll get to a bit more info behind that, and we'll look at later some functionality behind using a masters to price your bill of quantities. Okay, so now that we know how to price from first principles in Candy, we're going to look at what are the benefits of first principles estimating. So firstly, you'll notice that when I priced the second ready mix item or the second concrete item, it was a lot quicker. So it's actually assists you in pricing and reusing rate build-up. So it speeds up the pricing process. And you can use rate build-ups from your current job or from previous jobs, which we call masters. It also improves your accuracy of your estimates and tenders. It helps with effective remodeling and value engineering. So now that we've got worksheet build-up, we can utilize this information on site, and the team on site can actually re-engineer these estimates. You can do upfront to assist you with upfront purchasing control. So I'll show you that example a bit later. And it also will help you manage and containing your costs during the project execution. So speeding up the pricing process with the reuse of rate build-ups. So let's show you that benefit in Candy. Okay, so back to the screen in Candy, and how can this first principles pricing assist us with speeding up the pricing process? So concreting ground slabs, for example, each rate build-up has a price code behind it. So what it means is I can reuse that price code, which means it would reuse the rate build-up. So somewhere else in the bill, I could have used ground slabs or price ground slabs. So I can filter for that. And you'll notice it's been used in the vent shaft and it's been used in the substation. So if I want to reuse that price code, it's a matter of copying that same price code and pasting it on the new item in the price code column, and you'll notice that rate built up is now copied. You'll see the attribute is W for worksheet. If I double click on the worksheet, you'll notice that build up has been pulled through. And you'll notice on the worksheet header where in the bill that price code has been used. So this means if I build up or change the rate here, it's going to change elsewhere in the bill. So in some cases you might not want that. Maybe this is a bit isolated in isolated areas, so the production will be a bit less. So what you can do is clone this price code. So I wouldn't build up the rate build up from scratch. I just clone it. So what it means is it's now got its own price code, but I can now change this worksheet without affecting the previous items. Open up the worksheet. You'll notice on the worksheet header, it's only used on item C on page 7. And like I mentioned, isolated areas, so production will be slightly less. and store the worksheet. And that worksheet only applies to this bill item now because it's got its own unique price code. So that's where resource-based pricing assists us with speeding up the pricing process. If I look at concrete in bases, this particular item, I could just double click in the price code column and then allocate the relevant price code to this item. Double click and that pulls through the rate buildup. You'll see that red indicator block indicating multiple uses. So just remember, if you change the rate here, it's going to change elsewhere in the bill of quantities, which is sometimes a requirement because you don't want to have to go, let's say, for example, a housing project, house type A, B, and C. You've priced house type A, you want to reuse it for house type B. If you tweak the rate, you want it to adjust everywhere else in that particular project. So in some cases it's good, and in some cases you want to change that depending on the requirement for that particular item. Now where you want to price using a master, so this allows us to do that as well. So you'll see on my toolbar, no master is available, but I can select a previously priced job in Candy. I can go browse for it. A master can sit on my local C drive, or a master could also sit on a network. If you've got a network setup, this is ideal. You've got a tender department that utilizes the same master. It's a good way to standardize your pricing across the organization. In this case, I'm going to use one of my previous jobs. So you'll see now on the toolbar that displays my previous job. That's my current job I'm in, and I'm busy and I'm using this previous job as my master. So this now allows me to pull through price codes. You'll notice the difference now. I can choose it from job price codes, or I can choose it from master price codes. And you can pull in the relevant price codes, pull it in from the master. So it's in foundations, and that then pulls in that rate from the master. I do the same for the vertical walls, and then I'm going to do the same for the reinforcing. Okay, so basically, based on what I showed you, you'll see how it benefited us in terms of speeding up the pricing process. So yes, although every project is different, first principles estimating rate buildups can be reused and repeated and repurposed as pricing templates or as masters, because similar work can be copied and you can just simply tweak to suit the job. Retrospectively, analyzing estimates and their accuracy in terms of rate, usage, and productions will also continually improve accuracy and estimating confidence. So it's not an exact science. You'll see your first estimate, your price when you get your second one, because of feedback from the team on site, you can then adjust that and adjust your masters and reutilize that feedback from the site team. And that's how you'll improve your estimates over time. So improved accuracy of your estimates. And another useful benefit of first principles pricing is, you'll have much better chance to budget, control, and manage your costs. And the saying goes, down to the nuts and bolts. So why did I go through all this effort? At the end of the day, you can generate powerful analysis reports. So one of my favorites is the 80-20 resource analysis. You got resources per bill item, you got resources per trade. You can print a wastage report, and you can also do resource traces. So let's show you this in the system. Okay, so back in Candy, and I've priced these bill items. I've got all of them priced using worksheets, and let's show you some reports now. So one of the ones that I mentioned was the 80-20 on resource allowable. So this particular one, you'll see it orders my resources by their value. So if I look, for example, at my labor, you see all my labor resources are grouped together. And the laborer, I've got 15,000 days allowed at $374 per day. And you see that's one of the big spending items on the labor category, 5.6 million on labor. So that's 57% of my labor cost. If I look at my material, for example, you'll see my Portland cement. I need 44,000 bags of cement at 79 per bag. That's 3.5 million on just that one particular resource. And that actually contributes 20% of all my material. So this helps me be a bit more competitive because you can then isolate the big value resources. And if you can get a better and negotiate a better rate for that particular resource, it's going to have a bigger impact on your tender price. So that's your 80-20 analysis. Another one would be a resource per bill item. So this gives us a resource analysis for each individual bill item. So to clear the Randstrip site, 10,800 squares, this is the resource requirement to do that work. And each individual item, because they've been priced with a worksheet build-up, you can see the resource usage required per bill item. So this would be a report that you'd send with the team on site. So I'll call it a tender six-pack report, which consists of the various reports, and the team on site could have access to this report, and they can then analyze the individual items on how they were priced. And that's where the re-engineering of the estimate would be useful. This report would be handy because you can see exactly how the estimator priced these items. You got analysis by trade and type. So it's a bit more summarized. It's still a resource analysis, but this time it gives it to me by trade. So to do the earthworks consists of 6.6 million, and this is the resource requirement to do the earthworks trade. And then you got for concrete, and you'll see each relevant trade giving us a resource analysis broken down to trade. Okay, wastage analysis. Because I used percent waste in my worksheets, it now also gives me a wastage analysis for the resources. If I look at my diesel, for example, or let's look at that ready mix. I priced that on those concrete items. So my net quantity is 1,990 cubes. I've got an average wastage of 9.2%, which equates to 184 cubes at 1,300 per cube. So that's a total of 239,000. So that could have a big impact on my bottom line. If I can minimize the wastage, that could then become potential profit. And lastly, as a tracer, this is going to help me find where those particular resources are used. So let's take, for example, my ready mix. You can remember my resource code 511. If I can't remember the rest of it, I can just scroll down to find it. And that's the ready mix. So this is going to show me where that resource is used in the bill of quantities. So if I change this resource rate, it's going to affect these items in the bill of quantities. So these are the items. It's two items affected. It's the concrete in foundation and concrete in walls. So you can do a report equivalent, or I prefer to do it on screen. You can also do the same analysis on screen on your resource list. So if I go, let's say, my laborer, right click on the resource code, cross-reference it, and I choose the option to cross-reference resources by bill item. And that then lists all the bill items there that have labor priced in them. And a change in the rate would affect all of these items in my bill of quantities. And you'll see there's that 5.6 million for that laborer, and the utilization 15,207 days. And that's built up of these individual items. So to clear the site, 21 days of labor has been allowed. Bulk excavation, 467 days. And all of this contributes to labor. If I change the rate here in my bill, it's going to change the rate throughout the bill of quantities. So just continuing with the benefits of first principles estimating. Another one would be relating to post-tender aspects. And this typically would happen once a contract has been awarded and the team on site would need to re-engineer the estimate to take into account what's going to be happening on site. So first principles estimating lends itself to re-engineering the estimate. But after the contract award, the team executing the project may re-engineer the estimate to take into account how the work will be executed on site. So they look at things like suppliers to help with resource betterments. They re-look at your productions, so they take into account weather conditions and site conditions, because that will affect your productions. They also look at the methodology of work, how was the estimate priced, and they re-look at that and see, is it relevant for this particular project? You could have a ready-mix plant just down the road, so estimator could have priced site batch, but team on site decide to switch it to a ready-mix job. It's another thing you could look into, maybe scarcity of material, because that takes into account long lead items and key resources. That's something that you'd want to make the procurement department aware of. And the list goes on. So we're going to go into the Candy job and we're going to show you how that is done. So we're going to look at replacing, adjusting and adding resources, productions. So things that, this will make it quite simple to adjust because you've already got the worksheet build up, and that allows you to re-engineer the estimate, and it's pretty quick to do that, and I should demonstrate that. So just an example of that is we'll show you changing cost of cement. That by changing the resource rate, it will automatically adjust the unit rate in the bill item that use that cement, and that would affect things like your brickwork, concrete, and plastering rate. So in Candia, we'll demonstrate resource traces. We'll look at an example of a resource betterment, and we'll also show you how to switch the job between site batch and ready-mix. Okay, so back into Candy, and what we're going to look at is re-engineer this estimate. So typically what we'll need to do is have a copy of this job, because generally you'd have your estimate and you'd want to keep a copy of that, and you'll re-engineer it, so you don't want to make changes to the original estimate. You want a copy of that just for reference purposes. So it's good practice to always make a copy. Just right click and duplicate it. And then this copy, I'll rename that to remodeled. And this will be the one I'll be working on. Opening up the job. Now, if you can recall earlier, I printed some resource analysis reports. So that helped me identify key resources. And so I'm just going to go back to it to relook at these reports. The 80/20 resource allowable, this particular report, very useful because it orders my resources by their value. And I can see where I want a resource betterment. Obviously, in this particular case, will be my cement, because it contributes 20% of my material and 10% of my contract value. So I'd want to try and renegotiate a better rate on this cement resource. Maybe you could use the bulk order as a bargaining tool. 44,000 bags of cement available. And let's just have a look what happens if we actually re-engineer this resource. How would we do this for resource betterments? Firstly, it's key to have the job ready for post-tender control. You'll see in our 2 or 3 course notes, we've got a course called Post-Tender Project Control. We take you through a whole checklist of post-tender checks, and one of the key checks is a selling rate. So if I go to my bill of quantities, you'll notice I've got a net rate. That's the rate built up, which was first principles pricing. You've got a gross rate, which is the rate plus markup. That's generally the rate you'd submit for tender purposes. And you've got a selling rate, which is the rate for post-tender control used at post-tender stage. Now, the reason why we won't use the gross, because obviously that's the contract value, but the gross rate is a calculated rate. And if you make a change on the net rate or markup, it will change the gross rate. And that's something that you don't want at post-tender phase. So obviously, you've got a contractual rate in place, and that won't change. The client has agreed to paying you a unit rate. So that you want to lock in place, and we use the selling rate for that. A simple way is to right click on the selling rate column, and there's the option to copy selling rate from gross. I'll copy and lock them after copy. You'll see now the selling rate is in place, and when I calculate, all the values are now calculated, and you'll notice the selling amount equates to the gross amount. So from here onwards, I'll use my selling rate to claim to the client, and I'll use my net rate for allowables. The gross rate will become obsolete at post-tender stage. I normally call that a estimator's tool, but for post-tender phase, it's not ideal. And I'll illustrate that now when I re-engineer my estimate. So taking into account my betterment, my resource betterment, I'd like to renegotiate a better rate for my cement. So going to my resource list, and you'll see the cement there. There's my rate of $79.58 per bag. So let me change that rate. I get a better resource rate in place, and I've renegotiated. Let's just say it's 77 per bag now. So that will adjust all the bill items that have that resource in place. And if I go back to my bill and calculate, you'll start noticing the concrete items, their rates start changing because it's got cement in it. If I look at my gross rate, it's now slightly lower compared to my selling rate. That's the contractual rate, so that won't change. This gross rate, like I mentioned, becomes obsolete, and my net rate is my new allowable. So that's what we refer to as a resource betterment. Another example of re-engineering would be things like switching between batch and ready-mix concrete, so different construction methods. Another thing would be switching between your own work and subcontracting. That's another thing you'd also re-look at in terms of re-engineering. So an example of that, if I go into this concrete item, you'll see the concrete has been built up. I've got a rate of 1,223. If I open up that complex resource, you'll notice that the money sits in the batch concrete section because I've got a switch applied. It's a ready-mix switch, and I've built up this worksheet to give me this sort of functionality. I've put in both options. I've put in the batch concrete option, and I've put in the ready-mix option, but it's not contributing any ready-mix because my switch is on batch concrete. So how do I switch it back? Or how do I switch it between the two? It's through a global variable. You see RMC is a global variable, and at the moment the global variable equals RMC 0. So if I go to the hammer, that's the definitions menu, and I go to my global variables, you'll see ready-mix, the switch is on 0. So that means it's a site batch job. And if I want to make it a ready-mix job, it's simply changing that from a 0 to a 1. When I click OK, now this switch has been built into all my concrete resources. So if I go there, you'll notice now it zeroes all the batch items, and it now gives me a value for a ready-mix item. All I do then is store it, and this now turns my job from a site batch job to a ready-mix job. If I go into all my other concrete items, Into that particular resource, you'll notice it's also moved from SitePatch to ReadyMix. Next item, just to have a quick squiz at the 25 MPa concrete. Go into that build-up, and you'll see it's now from batch to ReadyMix. So just to see the effect of that on my resource analysis, so to see that, I'll go back to my reports, and you'll see it's the 80-20 on resource allowable. Just to preview that, again, just focusing on the material, you'll notice now it's no longer cement that's a key resource. It's now the ready-mix concrete, and the value for it 5 million on the 20 MPa, and which equates to 29% of my material, and that's 15% of my contract value. Okay, so now that we've re-engineered the estimate, and one of the benefits of doing that is the buying list is now relevant to what you're going to actually be using on site. So this now gives you the upfront purchasing control. That resource analysis is now useful. We can give this to the buying department, and we can get the control based down to the simple resource level. So basically it gives you lets you know what you need to complete the project. So it's your budgeted estimate, and you can then compare what you require against your budgeted estimate. So at some point, you're going to place a requisition, you know how much ready-mix is required, and at some point you might exceed that quantity. And at that point, you'll know that you're in for a loss. You'll also know it at the rate based on your resource rate. If you've got a budgeted rate at 1,200 and you want to procure it at 1,250, you already know at that point you're in for a loss on your ready-mix concrete. So it gives you that upfront purchasing control. And here's an example of that. So this is our BuildSmart system. We have the seamless link or upload of our resource budget from Candy into BuildSmart. And the buyer then has this information available. When they create a requisition, you'll see that all the text in yellow is your budgeted quantity. So here you've got hard hats. Budgeted quantity is 569, and at this stage you've purchased 30. So that gives us that upfront control. You've got a budget of 569. At this stage, within budget, you've purchased 30. And this continues going and continues to grow in quantity as you create requisitions for that particular resource. At some stage, you'll know in budget or you're out of budget. And you'll also see the quantity is available and the rate. You can see your original price, so that was my budgeted rate, and you can see the rate that you're buying it at. And somebody approved this additional rate at a higher expense than what was budgeted. So we already know we're in for a loss on hard hats based on rate. Okay, so we'll also have one of the benefits is to help you manage and contain your costs during project execution. So all of this information, like I mentioned earlier, that resource information is available for the team on site. They'll re-engineer the worksheets, and then they get that upfront purchasing control. But this also lends itself to control during project execution. So yes, it is a crucial part. So it allows you to know where and what you're making or losing money on at any point in the project. So it's giving you insight, time, and the basis to capitalize on gains and mitigate your losses. So if you can manage and contain your costs, revenue will take care of itself, and in turn your bottom line. That's what it's all about, isn't it? So let's show you this example within Candy, cost and allowables. So this is during project execution, and at any point in time you can compare your allowable versus your cost, typically on a day of the month, typically on day of cost close. So you go measure a value up to the day 25, for example. You do a measurement in your bill. That's going to generate a budget to date. Your accounting system, like BuildSmart, is going to give you a cost to date up to day 25, and you're going to compare your cost versus your allowable. So let's show you this in Candy. Okay, so this is an example of cost versus allowables in Candy. You'll see it's already generated. I've generated a valuation. I'm sitting in valuation number 2. It generates an allowable to date. The cost to date is imported in this example from BuildSmart. And that gives me a variance to date. So if I roll this up, you can see my job total. I can see a high level where my job status is to date, remaining and at completion, and I'll explain that in a moment. But let's look at to date. I can draw that down. I can view it at a cost code level. And you can see, for example, general labor, a cost of 4,355,000 versus an allowable of 4,363,000. So I've got a positive variance there of 8,000. So it looks like I'm all doing good on that particular cost code. But if you drill it down further, you can see this down to tasks. So if your cost comes in task code and cost code level, we can compare that to the allowable. And you can actually see a problem task code there. Yes, I'm doing okay for labor and I'm doing well on all the other tasks. Excavation doing well, doing very well on filling. But if you look at the foundations, concrete and foundations, that's a problem area there. My allowable is 700 versus a cost. I'm losing almost 20,000. And that allows me to pinpoint problem activities. And then we know which activities to deal with to mitigate further losses. Then it also looks at the remaining and allowable versus the remaining cost. Now this is where first principles estimating becomes really useful, because this is a very accurate way of calculating your remaining cost. So your remaining allowable is remaining quantity multiplied by your net rate. But if you want to calculate a remaining cost, you need a cost rate. So in Candy, it allows you to pull in a cost rate at a resource level or at a bill item level. So each resource has 2 rates. It's got a final rate for allowable and a cost rate for cost. So go into my resource list. You'll see there's my final rate. That's what's generating my allowable. If I look at my cost rate, let's say, for example, you'll see the cost rate is the same as my final, as my allowable. So everything's the same except for where you want to change it. So let's say I get a labor increase. It's no longer 374. So from here onwards, I'm going to be paying 400 per day. I type it in as a cost rate. My allowable remains the same, but my cost is now higher. If I go back to my cost report and calculate, you'll see I had a profit of remaining allowable of 149. Now I can see a net effect of that rate increase and 70 grand loss on my remaining cost for my labor. So this allows us to do it at a resource level, but you can also do it at a bill item level. And this obviously is because we've got first principles pricing embedded in this estimate. So if I go to my bill of quantities, you'll notice each bill item has a cost rate and a net rate. And you'll notice the cost rate already exceeds the net rate, and that's because I changed the cost rate for labor. So wherever I use labor, it's already adjusted. So I'm going to look at items that's still remaining, because that's going to affect my remaining cost. And let's take, for example, my concrete and foundations. And you'll notice my net rate, and I've already got a cost worksheet there. If I open up my cost worksheet, I'm achieving 15 cubes a day, but I can actually do way better than that. You can actually achieve 30 cubes a day. So by changing that, I store that, and you'll see my net rate still remains 1,500 per cube, but my cost rate is a lot lower at 1,300 per cube. If I go back to my cost report and calculate it, it's brought down that loss of 69,000 to a positive variance of 88,000 on my remaining, and that's mainly due to concrete and foundations. And that's just because of the one item that I've now re-engineered in terms of cost worksheet. My at completion cost is the sum of what I've incurred to date plus my remaining cost to give me a at completion cost. And this is how first principles estimating assists us with project execution. Okay, this now brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you for your time, and I trust you have greater insight into first principles estimating. Please remember to email your local CCS office if you want to know more about this topic. We will keep you informed of the next webinar, and remember, if you're unable to join at the selected time, then please still register and you'll receive a recording of the webinar which you can watch at your own leisure. Enjoy the rest of your day. Till the next webinar, goodbye for now.